Alaska. Over 500,000 square miles of silence, snow, and stories that never get endings. Planes vanish without a trace. People walk into town and are never seen again. Hikers, clerks, congressmen, all swallowed by a land that doesn't explain itself. In this cold, beautiful expanse, mystery isn't rare, it's routine. These are 33 real disappearances you've probably never heard of. No killers named, no bodies found, just gaps. So bundle up, stay close, and whatever you do, don't wander off. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed. It helps us keep the lights on while we chase shadows. And while you're here, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city and the time. Midnight in Montana? 3 a.m. in Berlin? Let's see who else is out there, awake with the ghosts. Erin Marie Gilbert. It was the 1st of July, 1995. The kind of day Alaska pretends to be friendly. Sun-drenched, tree-wrapped, and crawling with tourists who thought the Girdwood Forest Fair would be quirky, not eerie. Booths were selling hand-carved soapstone moose, tie-dye was in full bloom, and somewhere between the funnel cakes and the indie fiddlers, a 4-year-old woman named Erin Marie Gilbert walked into the woods and was never seen again. She wasn't alone, at first. Erin had driven down from Anchorage to attend the forest fair with a man she'd just started seeing, a blind date kind of situation. His name doesn't matter here, because he came back. Erin didn't. The story he told was casual at first. He said they were enjoying the festival, Erin had a few drinks, and then the car wouldn't start. He claimed he left her near the fairgrounds to go get help, supposedly walked to a friend's house, couldn't find them, and came back hours later to find Erin gone. Just gone. The kind of gone that leaves no scream, no witness, no mess. A clean erasure, like a chalkboard wiped in silence. That was the last time anyone admitted to seeing her. Searches followed, of course. Search dogs, helicopters, volunteers, all of them combing through the underbrush like guilt made physical. But the forest fair isn't Disneyland. It's nestled against the Chugach Mountains, and Girdwood's surrounding trails are a patchwork of wild, wet, and unknowable. She could have wandered, some said, got lost, fell, or walked off by choice, though no one who actually knew Erin believed that last one. Because here's what doesn't sit right. Erin had told her sister she'd call after the festival. She was described as grounded, independent, not the type to vanish into a tree line just because a date went sideways or a car battery fizzled. Her family insisted something was wrong. The problem was, no one could agree on what. The man she was with, well, let's just say his story had a way of shape-shifting. Over the years, the version he gave to police morphed in tone and timing. First, he said he left Erin around 6 p.m. to look for help. Then, it was 7. Then maybe she wanted to stay? No, wait, maybe she walked off. Cars don't start, stories stall. And suddenly the entire narrative starts to feel like it was carved from driftwood, hollow and water-damaged. But there was no arrest, no physical evidence, not even enough to confidently name a suspect. Just a festival, a faulty car, a missing woman, and a man whose memory was slightly too flexible. And what about the fair itself? You'd think with all those people around, vendors, tourists, performers, someone would have noticed Erin. But the crowd became its own kind of fog. Nobody remembered her clearly. No photos surfaced. Even in broad daylight, surrounded by strangers and sound, she had disappeared in a way that felt practiced, almost designed. That's the part that stays with you, the ease of it. The idea that a person can walk into a small-town festival and simply be unmade. Like something reached out of the tree line and gently plucked her out of the frame. Erin's case remains one of Alaska's most haunting unsolved disappearances, No confirmed sightings, no digital footprints, just theories. Some believe she met with foul play. Others cling to the wilderness theory, hoping against logic that maybe she got lost, that maybe she's still out there, one wrong turn away from coming home. But time, as it tends to do, has done its quiet erosion. It's been 3 decades. Her name now sits in the Charlie Project like a scar on a forgotten map, preserved but unhealed. And the Forest Fair? Still held every year, still cheerful, still selling soapstone mousse. Somewhere, a young woman might be dancing barefoot between the trees. Or not. Because the most unnerving thing about Erin Gilbert's disappearance isn't the lack of evidence. It's that she vanished in a crowd and still became invisible. Which brings us to another young person, another summer, another so-called ordinary night in Alaska. A teenage boy biking home from a party in a town that only looks quiet from the outside. Michael Timothy Palmer. Wasilla, Alaska. The 4th of June, 1999. The kind of summer night where everything smells like trees and bike grease. School's out. The air tastes like freedom, and for a 15-year-old named Michael Palmer, the world was still just small enough to feel safe. He was last seen riding his bike home from a graduation party. Not a wild rager, just a local get-together. Friends said he was sober, lucid, making plans for the weekend. There were no fights, no warnings, no goodbyes that sounded final. Just a few laughs, some gravel roads, and Michael on a red Huffy, pedaling into the dark like a kid who had every reason to believe the night would end in his own bed. It didn't beat. That ride from the party on Pittman Road to his house, just a few miles away, should have taken 15 minutes. Maybe 20 if he was slow. But somewhere along that familiar stretch, something interrupted the story. At 1 a.m., he was still with friends. By 4 a.m., he was gone. What filled those missing 3 hours is a silence so complete it borders on surreal. The next morning, Michael's mother realized something was off. He hadn't come home, hadn't called, and the alarm bells in her head weren't the panicked, movie-type screams, just a cold, creeping wrongness. She began looking. Friends were called. Yards checked. By evening, police were involved. What they found made no sense. Michael's bike was discovered a few days later in the Little Susitna River, almost 6 miles from the party. It looked like it had been thrown, not ridden, and its location raised immediate questions. First, how did it get there? Second, where was Michael? There was no sign of his body, no footprints, no drag marks. The water was searched, divers went in, dogs were brought out, nothing. Not a sock, not a broken chain, not even a scent trail that could explain why a kid would abandon his only way home and trek into cold water in the middle of the night, wearing just jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt. And then there was the backpack. His school bag was found a short distance away from the bike, sitting oddly upright as if placed, not dropped, not flung, placed. Inside were a few basic items, nothing out of the ordinary, but that was the problem. Everything about it screamed interruption. Not accident, not teenage misadventure, interruption. Over the years, rumors have filled the vacuum. Some say he was chased. Others believe he met someone along the way, someone who didn't like questions. Theories range from teenage scuffle turned deadly to deeper, darker suggestions of foul play. But again, no evidence ever fully formed. No confession, no trace. Just a bike in a river, and a mother who still leaves the porch light on. The geography of it makes it worse. Wasilla isn't the end of the world, it just feels like it when the fog rolls in. Dirt roads twist through heavy woods. There are places out there where sound doesn't echo and headlights don't reach. You don't need a conspiracy to make someone disappear in Alaska. You just need 5 minutes and a patch of gravel no one looks at twice. Michael's family didn't sit quietly. They passed out flyers, put up billboards, hired private investigators. Every few years, the case gets a brief flicker of attention. A cold case unit reviewing the files, a tip that leads nowhere, a Facebook post that gets shared and then sinks. His brothers, now adults, still talk about that night like it's stuck in amber, a loop they can't step out of, a question that keeps getting asked in a language the world forgot how to speak. What makes Michael's disappearance especially cruel is its ordinariness. He wasn't hiking across a glacier. He wasn't testing fate in the backcountry. He was biking home from a party. The kind of thing kids do 1,000 times without incident. No foreshadowing, no red flags, just a flat stretch of road that swallowed a person and didn't burp. Police officially categorized the case as a non-suspicious missing person. That's bureaucratic speak for, we don't know what happened, but we can't prove it was foul play either. It's the kind of gray area that keeps parents up at night because not suspicious doesn't mean safe. It just means no one saw enough. And maybe that's what Alaska does best. Not hide things, exactly, but make them small enough to lose. A boy, a bike, a backpack, all swallowed by a landscape that never felt the need to explain itself. But if you think that's haunting, try this on for size. Over 2 decades later, the river still runs past that same spot. Locals fish from the banks. Kids dare each other to jump off rocks. Tourists snap photos. And somewhere under the water or the soil or the silence, something knows what happened to Michael. You just have to wonder if it remembers him at all. Which brings us to another vanishing, more recent this time. A young woman in Nome, a coastal town built on gold dust, ghost stories, and just enough isolation to keep secrets buried deep in the tundra. If you're still with us and not nervously checking your locks, now's a good time to hit that subscribe button. It keeps the stories coming and the mysteries piling up. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you tuning in from and what time is it right now? Midnight in Manila? Sunrise in Saskatchewan? Let's map this out, one missing hour at a time. Florence Flo Okpeluk, Nome, Alaska, the 31st of August, 2020. There's a kind of stillness that lives in places like Nome. Not the peaceful kind, more like the heavy, held breath kind. A waiting, as if the wind knows something you don't, as if the sea is watching. Florence Okpeluk Flo, as her friends and family called her, vanished into that silence 4 years ago. She was 33, Inupiaq, and familiar with every frozen gust that whipped across Front Street. Born and raised in western Alaska, she knew what it meant to survive in a place that tries every day to make you disappear. She knew the unspoken rules: don't walk alone at night, don't trust easily, and don't assume someone's coming to help. And yet, on the last day of August, Florence walked out toward West Beach and did not come back. Witnesses said they saw her near a tent encampment along the beach. That's where some locals camp when housing falls through or when the weather's just warm enough to stay mobile. She'd been staying there herself, off and on, struggling with the kind of housing insecurity that Nome doesn't like to put on the brochures. It's easier to sell sled dog races than it is to talk about what happens when Indigenous women go missing in a town that always claims to be tight-knit. She was last seen in the late hours of the night. Some say she was barefoot, wearing just a sweatshirt. That detail gets repeated a lot, almost as if people want it to mean something. Vulnerability, maybe. A sign. But it could just as easily be a red herring, a way of pretending there was some logic to what came next. Because, after that moment, Florence simply ceased to be visible. Police were notified the following day. Her family, used to long silences, but not this kind, panicked quickly. The searches began. But Nome is not an easy place to search. The beach is vast and ragged. The sea brushes right up against the bones of old gold dredges and shipwrecked trash. It hides things well. And it's not just the sea that's complicating things. There are no surveillance cameras out on West Beach. No helpful ring doorbells or well-lit sidewalks. You get sand, ice, and seagulls. If something happened, it happened off the record. Unwitnessed. The kind of event that doesn't leave footprints, only rumors. Within days, FBI agents arrived. Not because Florence was famous or politically connected, but because of the pattern, the unspoken pattern. Alaska Native women and girls going missing at rates that make the phrase disproportionate feel like an understatement. And Nome has a history. Ask around, the locals can name them. Sonia Ivanov, Francis Charles, Melanie Peter. Names that flicker and fade in newsprint. Names that feel like echoes of Florence's own story. But the national attention didn't stick. It never does. Searchers scoured the beach. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Planes flew over the shoreline. The official narrative said, no signs of foul play. But what does that even mean in a place that hides everything? She didn't have a car. She didn't leave town. She didn't take her ID or her purse. There was no bank activity, no messages, no final words. And yet she was gone. Some pointed fingers at local men with reputations. Others blamed the cold, the sea, or her own choices. But blame is a coward's currency when the facts are this fragile. The truth is, there was nothing about Florence's disappearance that made sense. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It just happened. Which is why it sticks. Florence wasn't invisible. She had friends, family, a community that loved her. She was known. She made people laugh. She stood up for herself. She had dreams that were ridiculous and beautiful and stubborn. She mattered. And still, she vanished in a town where you're never supposed to be alone. A town where everyone claims to know everyone, but nobody knows what happened to Flo. Her family still holds out hope, though hope in Nome is more like a ritual, a habit. You light the candle, you ask the question, you try not to let it ruin you. And you wonder, was it the ocean? Was it someone she trusted? Was it something darker, older, that lives in the cracks of places like Nome? The official case remains open. Her missing person flyer still surfaces in town now and then, yellowing around the edges. Strangers still drive past West Beach and glance toward the tents and the tide, waiting for something to blink back. But no new leads have emerged, just time and silence. And the weight of knowing that if Florence Okpiluk can vanish without a trace, then so can anyone. Which brings us to another woman, another small town, another life disrupted in quiet. She left for an appointment and never arrived. And what happened next was so invisible, it took years before anyone could even agree it was real. Anesha Duffy Murnane. Homer, Alaska. The 17th of October, 2019. Some stories don't begin with a scream. They start with an ordinary walk on an ordinary afternoon in a town so small that everyone notices when you disappear. That's what makes Homer different. It's not wilderness-level remote. It's artsy, quaint, the kind of coastal Alaskan town that sells hand-blown glass ornaments and fresh halibut to tourists who think they've found the real Alaska. Duffy Murnane had lived there most of her life. She was 38, warm-spirited, soft-spoken, and trusted by nearly everyone. Her name, Anesha, was rarely used outside of forms and formalities. To Homer, she was Duffy. She lived in a supportive housing apartment complex called Main Tree, designed for people with disabilities. Duffy had dealt with mental health challenges over the years, but she was doing well-grounded, stable, following a routine that gave her life a reliable rhythm. Every Thursday, she walked a short path through town to her counselor's office, about a 10-minute walk, a path she'd taken so many times she could have done it blindfolded. But on Thursday, the 17th of October, 2019, Duffy never made it to her appointment. No calls, no sightings, no alarms triggered. She was there, and then she wasn't. Her mother, Sarah became concerned that evening. When she couldn't reach Duffy by phone, she tried not to panic, not right away. After all, this was Homer. The kind of place where neighbors wave, where people help each other dig their cars out of snow, where most folks still leave their doors unlocked because, frankly, they'd rather not admit something could go wrong here. But by the next morning, the concern curdled into dread. Duffy had never simply vanished before. She had a routine, a predictable comfort in her steps. Her bank account hadn't been touched. Her cell phone had stopped pinging that afternoon near her apartment, suggesting she never even got far. Security camera footage from a nearby building showed her walking calmly down the sidewalk around 12:13 p.m., wearing a light blue jacket and a backpack. She wasn't running. She wasn't confused. Just walking. Confident. Unhurried. Like she had done hundreds of times before. That footage was the last known visual of her. And then the questions began. The police launched a search almost immediately. Volunteers canvassed the town and its outskirts. Drones flew over the forested areas surrounding the residential zones. Boats searched the water. Dogs were brought in. Flyers were posted in every post office, every gas station, every ferry dock and small-town diner across the Kenai Peninsula. But days passed, then weeks, then months. No sign of Duffy. The only whisper of a lead came more than a year later, when a man named Paul Salipez, an itinerant former Homer resident with a long criminal record, was arrested in Colorado on unrelated charges. Eventually, through a circuitous route of information, authorities began to suspect he might be connected to Duffy's disappearance. He had allegedly been in Homer at the time. He had known her. And he had access to a blue Subaru, a vehicle that would become an eerie, unconfirmed thread in the case. The FBI eventually charged him in 2022 with kidnapping resulting in death, even though Duffy's remains have never been recovered. The case is now tied up in court, tangled in the gray zone between circumstantial suspicion and hard evidence. But her family says they no longer believe she's alive. What they want now is clarity. Something resembling peace. But peace is hard to come by in cases like this, because nothing about Duffy's disappearance feels resolved. It doesn't feel explainable. It feels surgical, the kind of vanishing that leaves almost nothing to work with. Not a dropped phone, not a footprint, not even the whisper of a struggle. And that's what haunts her town. Because if someone like Duffy, who walked the same route every week for years, could be quietly removed from the world in the middle of the day, just blocks from Main Street, then what's to stop it from happening again? To someone else? In broad daylight? The question lingers like fog. And beneath that fog sits a darker truth. Duffy's case isn't an outlier. It's not some strange blip in an otherwise safe landscape. Alaska has one of the highest missing persons rates in the country. The state has always been marketed as a place of freedom, of escape, of off-the-grid reinvention. But freedom and invisibility sometimes come packaged together, especially for women. Especially for those who live just outside the comfort zone of what society knows how to protect. Even with an arrest, the mystery remains. The body hasn't been found. The exact sequence of events is still unknown. Duffy's last known moment is still just a few seconds of calm footage on a grainy camera. A walk, a jacket, a path she trusted. And then, nothing. And just when you think this couldn't happen again in the same city, even you learn about another woman, a mother, a wife, gone without warning on the very first day of a new year. Her case would raise questions so bitter, even a trial couldn't answer them. Linda Louise Skeek, Anchorage, Alaska, the 1st of January, 2016. The year had barely begun. Resolutions were still clinging to champagne glasses. Snow blanketed the streets like a clean slate, pretending nothing bad could ever happen while it was still white outside. Linda Skeek had made it to midnight. She'd celebrated New Year's Eve. There were photos, smiles, family, music, and then, somewhere between the party and the hangover, she vanished. Just like that. Linda was 32 years old. a mother of 3, and by all accounts, grounded. She worked in behavioral health, a quiet presence with a soft laugh and the kind of patience you only learn by living through things that most people wouldn't want to talk about. That part matters. Because Linda wasn't reckless. She wasn't someone who disappeared on a whim. And she certainly didn't just walk away from her children. But that's exactly what people were asked to believe. The last confirmed sighting of Linda was around 2 a.m. on the 1st of January, 2016. She had been at a New Year's Eve gathering at a family member's home with her husband, Peter Skeek. According to reports, they left together. They went home. That's where the trail ends. What happened after that has never been pinned down. But something didn't add up almost immediately. She missed work. She didn't call her mother. She didn't check in on her kids. By the time family members realized she hadn't been seen or heard from, the tension had already calcified into something worse, that creeping, awful knowing that something was terribly wrong. Within days, police labeled the case as suspicious. But they didn't say why. Not publicly, not yet. And Anchorage being Anchorage moved on quickly. It always does. The city is used to things going quiet. It's a place where people can disappear in plain sight, and the wind will erase the footprints before anyone has a chance to follow. But Linda's family didn't forget. They pushed, they searched, they pleaded for answers. And eventually, the police stopped dancing around it. They named her husband, Peter, as a person of interest. Later, he would be charged with second-degree murder. They believed she had been killed inside their home on the very night of the celebration, the very first day of the year. But there was a problem. There was no body, no murder weapon, no blood trail. Only a theory that Linda had been killed and disposed of in a way that left no physical trace strong enough to seal the case completely. That's a difficult kind of justice to chase. The kind that relies on implication rather than evidence. The kind that turns courtroom trials into philosophical debates. Does the absence of proof mean the proof of absence? Peter Skeek stood trial in 2018, and in the kind of conclusion that only makes sense in real life, not in movies, he was acquitted. Not because the jury was sure of his innocence, but because the story lacked the anchor, Linda's remains. Without a body, there was no way to close the loop, no way to confirm the timeline, no way to answer the ultimate question, where is she? And so Linda remains listed as missing, not deceased, not presumed dead, just missing, officially unresolved. The emotional fallout, though, is anything but unresolved. Her children are growing up with a wound that never got stitched. Her family still holds on to anniversaries like glass, beautiful, sharp, painful to touch. Her case became another entry in the ever-growing ledger of Alaskans who disappeared into nothing. The tragedy of Linda's story isn't just the vanishing. It's the way the vanishing twisted everything else. Her home, her marriage, her reputation, her community. Trials don't heal. They divide. They confuse. They open doors and leave them swinging, and in the absence of certainty, the story gets reshaped over and over again. By the public, by the media, by memory, and now, by silence. People still speculate, of course. You can hear it in the corners of coffee shops in Anchorage, usually when they think no one's listening. She wouldn't just leave her kids. He never looked right to me. Someone knows something. Someone probably does. But in cases like Linda's, knowledge doesn't always translate into truth. And truth, in Alaska, has to wrestle with the landscape. Snow swallows evidence. Frozen rivers carry secrets. And justice, if it comes at all, tends to show up wearing a parka and arriving years too late. The home where Linda was last seen has changed hands. The neighborhood has gotten quieter. The headlines have faded. But the question remains, where is Linda Louise Skeek? And why does a new year in Alaska always seem to begin with a disappearance? If you're thinking that kind of silence is rare, that it only happens once in a blue moon. Meet Jael Tiara Hamblin, a young woman who was home, safe, and surrounded by familiarity until the story rewrote itself without warning. Jael Tiara Hamblin, Anchorage, Alaska, the 11th of October, 2014. Home is supposed to be the safest place in the story. The locked door, the warm lights, the point in the narrative where nothing truly bad can happen because it's too familiar, too lived in. For Jael Hamblin, 20 years old and trying to figure out the jagged transition from teenager to adult, home was a small apartment in Anchorage tucked into a quiet corner of the Trailside Loop area. Nothing fancy. But hers. She was last seen that Saturday, the 11th of October, in or near that apartment. The accounts vary, as they always do when clarity is inconvenient. According to some, Jael had spent part of the day with her roommate. Others said she'd been texting friends. Some people claimed they saw her walking alone later that evening. All of these might be true. Or none of them. That's the thing about stories like this. Facts tend to evaporate the second no one's looking. What's clear is this. Sometime that day, Jael disappeared. Not with a bang, not with a panic, just quietly, completely. She left behind her phone, her purse, her car, even her dog, the kind of things no one leaves behind unless they're planning to come back, or unless something made that choice for them. Her mother, Michelle, knew almost immediately that something was off. Jael was close with her family, especially her young son, who was staying with relatives at the time. There was no reason for her to vanish. She had plans, she had responsibilities, she had dishes in the sink, and no one goes missing in the middle of washing dishes unless the story turns. But the story didn't turn in any way that made sense. There was no evidence of a break-in, no signs of violence, no witnesses, no alarm. It was as if the day itself had swallowed her whole. Police questioned people close to her, including her roommate, a man she reportedly had a complicated relationship with. Not abusive, not explosive, just complicated. And that word, in missing persons cases, does a lot of heavy lifting. It suggests conflict without clarity. It introduces doubt without facts. It gives people something to lean on when they don't want to look directly at the void. That man would later become a focal point of unofficial theories, the kind that bubble up in internet forums and late-night conversations when evidence is too quiet and hope starts wearing thin. But no charges were filed. Nothing stuck. There was no proof of wrongdoing. Just a young woman who vanished into thin air on a Saturday in autumn, and the slow, corrosive realization that no one could say why. Jael's disappearance didn't make national news. It didn't go viral. It didn't get the kind of attention that usually shows up for blonde college students with out-of-state plates. It hovered quietly, mostly in local circles, friends sharing Facebook posts, relatives taping flyers to the back walls of convenience stores, and the occasional short segment on the local news that always ended with the same awkward line, "If you have any information, call this number." But numbers don't fill the silence. And for her family, the silence has been brutal. Jael's son is older now, old enough to ask questions. Her mother still lives in the space between hope and resignation, a space where you're constantly flipping between, maybe she's out there, and, at least let us find her. The family holds on to her memory with a mixture of determination and disbelief. Because how do you keep someone's name alive when the world has moved on? There's no evidence she left town. No credit card activity. No sightings. It's as if someone hit pause on her life, then quietly deleted the file. Every once in a while, a tip will come in. A whisper. A possible sighting. A person matching her description in a different state. But they always fizzle. Always. The frustrating part? Anchorage isn't that big. It's not LA or New York. If someone disappears in Anchorage, they don't just blend into millions of strangers. You can't vanish without at least someone noticing, unless, of course, that someone has a reason not to talk. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all. that someone out there might know exactly what happened to JL Tiara Hamblin, and they've decided not to say a word. Time passed. Years. Her name faded from the front pages, replaced by newer names, newer cases, newer silences. But for those who knew her, Giles' story remains like an open tab that never closes, always waiting, always unresolved. And the pattern continues. Because in Alaska, silence isn't rare. It's rhythmic, predictable, and it echoes. Just ask Valerie Jeanette Sifsoff, another woman who walked away from a campsite and into the woods and was never seen again. Valerie Jeanette Sifsoff, Granite Creek Campground, near Girdwood, Alaska, the 7th of July, 2012. They call it one of the prettier campgrounds on the Kenai Peninsula. Granite Creek, just far enough from Anchorage to feel wild, just close enough to pretend help is nearby. You've got picnic tables tucked beneath spruce trees, river water that could lull you to sleep, and in the distance, the relentless hush of wind moving through mountains older than memory. It's a place that should feel safe, but on one particular summer night, it didn't. Valerie Jeanette Sifsoff, 43, came to the Granite Creek campground for the same reason everyone else does, to get away. She arrived with her boyfriend, set up a site, and planned to enjoy the kind of peaceful weekend Alaska promises to anyone willing to drive a few hours out of cell service. They made camp, shared food, maybe told a few stories. Valerie wasn't a stranger to the outdoors. She was originally from Dillingham, a lifelong Alaskan, and as used to rivers and trees as some people are to traffic lights. If anything, she was comfortable in the kind of setting that makes other people double-check their bear spray. But then, somewhere between the evening and the morning, the story broke. On the night of the 7th of July, something happened. No one knows exactly what, because no one saw it, or at least, no one who saw it has ever said. According to her boyfriend, they got into an argument. Nothing explosive, just tension. Valerie, he said, left the campsite around 10:30 p.m. on foot. No gear, no flashlight, no car. Just walked off into the night, wearing jeans and a light sweater. Let's pause there, because if that version of the story doesn't sound strange, you haven't spent time in Alaska after dark. Even in July, it gets cold. The woods get deep. The sound of rushing water, beautiful by day, becomes disorienting by night. And the idea that a woman alone, unarmed, and lightly dressed would wander off voluntarily into the wilderness after an argument, that's not just unlikely. It's a statistical anomaly. But that's the version that stuck. She never came back. The next morning, she was reported missing, and search teams were mobilized. For weeks, Granite Creek became a kind of outdoor crime scene, except there was no crime, technically, just a disappearance. Searchers combed the riverbanks, dogs swept the trails, helicopters buzzed overhead looking for any trace of movement. Nothing. Not a shoe, not a thread of clothing, not even a scrap of disturbed brush. It was like Valerie had been swallowed by the trees. Her family, devastated but determined, didn't buy the story. They pushed for answers. They questioned the boyfriend's account. They raised money to fund independent searches. They refused to let Valerie become just another missing face on a flyer stapled to a trailhead. But time, as always, had other plans. A year later, in July 2013, hikers stumbled across partial remains in the area near the campground. DNA testing confirmed it was Valerie, but no cause of death could be determined. There were no obvious injuries, no clear indication of what happened after she walked away from that campfire. Just bones, weather-worn and silent. And with that, the case stopped being a missing person file and became something even harder, a question without a category. What happened that night? Did she fall? Get lost? Was she followed? Or did the truth walk back to the tent without her, sit down quietly, and wait for the questions to fade? The Alaska State Troopers didn't file charges. There was no conclusive evidence of foul play, just a timeline that didn't feel right and a woman who knew how to survive the outdoors until she didn't. And Granite Creek kept being Granite Creek. The trees kept growing, the river kept running, families kept camping, completely unaware that just a few feet from their sleeping bags, an unsolved mystery still hung in the air like a fog no one could see. Valerie's family still speaks her name. They still push for clarity, for a new investigation, for the kind of closure that Alaska doesn't often hand out. But, more than anything, they want people to remember. She was loved. She mattered. And the version of her story that ends with a woman just walking off into the dark doesn't sit right. It never has. Because Valerie didn't leave a note. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't vanish because she wanted to. She vanished because something or someone didn't let her come back. And just when you think you've heard the last of it, another name, another trail, another sudden unraveling, you find a Jeep parked near the Alpenglow ski area, keys still inside, engine cold, no driver in sight. As if the mountain itself took offense to being ignored. 7 stories in, and Alaska's just getting warmed up. If you're still listening, you're exactly our kind of person. Curious, a little sleepless, probably wondering what else vanishes without explanation. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know, where are you watching from, and what time is it out there? 2 a.m. in Ohio? Lunch break in Melbourne? Let's compare timelines, while we still can. Thomas Anthony Newsy. Anchorage to Chugach State Park, Alaska. The 18th of June 2001. It started with a Jeep, parked at the edge of the Alpenglow ski area, a low-profile spot nestled against the backdrop of the Chugach Mountains. Not exactly remote, but remote enough. The doors were locked. The keys were inside. So was his wallet. So were his cigarettes. The Jeep belonged to Thomas Newsy, 45 years old, new to Alaska and missing. There were no signs of distress, no broken glass, no scuff marks in the gravel, just a dark green Cherokee with out-of-state plates and a strange stillness that felt too final. Something about the way it was left, deliberate but unfinished, unsettled, the searchers almost immediately. Thomas had arrived in Alaska just weeks earlier, in May 2001, moving from Iowa with a sort of restless optimism that's common in people who come north in middle age, a chance to restart, reboot. Alaska has always marketed itself as the land of second acts, and Thomas bought the ticket. He was living in Anchorage, getting established, reconnecting with nature in that way people do when they've spent too long around strip malls and fluorescent lights. He had plans to hike, to find solitude, to test himself against the trail, not in a reckless way, but with the kind of steady, Midwestern confidence that says, I can handle this. He told a friend he was going hiking that day. Not a specific trail, but he did mention the Chugach area. The friend wasn't worried. June in Alaska is practically generous with daylight. The weather was fair. Nothing in Thomas's demeanor suggested recklessness. But he didn't come back. When he missed work, people noticed. When they checked his apartment and found it untouched, the alarm started going off. Then came the discovery of the Jeep. And just like that, Thomas Anthony Newsy joined the long list of people who went out into the Alaskan wilderness and never came back. The list Alaska never officially advertises, but never stops growing. Search and rescue teams mobilized quickly. The Jeep gave them a starting point, and that's more than most cases get. But the Chugach Mountains are an expert at swallowing trails. They're beautiful, but brutal. A tangle of ridgelines, avalanche chutes, icy creek beds, and game trails that spiderweb into nowhere. You could be 20 feet off path and vanish into a fold of the earth no one even knew was there. They brought in helicopters, dogs, volunteers. They covered miles of terrain around Alpenglow. They traced known trails, mapped possible routes, called his name until their voices broke. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a dropped glove, not a piece of clothing snagged on a branch. Which brings us back to the Jeep. Because, as much as people talk about the mountains, that vehicle became its own kind of symbol. There was something haunting about how completely untouched it was. Wallet, keys, ID, everything that says, "I'm coming right back," all left behind. One theory is that Thomas parked the car, locked it with the spare key, and set off on foot, intending to return in a few hours. That maybe he misjudged a trail, slipped on scree, got caught in a crevice. But if that were true, anything should have surfaced. Even in Alaska, people don't just evaporate. Other theories crept in. Some said he intended to disappear, that this was a voluntary vanishing, a final, clean break. But those who knew him pushed back hard on that. He wasn't running from debt. He wasn't in legal trouble. He had just moved, just started a new job, just bought groceries, and you don't buy groceries if you're planning to never need them again. Then there's the darker possibility that maybe he met someone out there, not a bear, not a moose, someone, the kind of someone who doesn't leave marks, only questions, but again, no evidence. The police treated the case seriously, but without urgency, as they often do when a disappearance is near wilderness. There's an implicit shrug in how these cases get processed. The mountains are big. People get lost. What can you do? But Thomas wasn't reckless. He wasn't a thrill seeker. He was a man trying to reconnect with nature, to breathe after years of routine. His only mistake might have been trusting the trail more than it deserved. To this day, no sign of him has ever surfaced. The Chugach Mountains hold their silence like a secret they don't feel obligated to share. And Thomas's name lives on in missing person databases, a few aging posters, and in the memories of those who still can't quite believe a man can walk into a national park and simply fall off the edge of the map. But in Alaska, that's not unheard of. It's routine, it's ritual. And while some vanish into the woods, others slip into the cracks of the city, like Samantha Kent, who was last seen in Anchorage on a quiet autumn day, and then nowhere, ever again. Samantha Lee Kent, Anchorage, Alaska, the 1st of November, 1993. By the time Samantha Kent vanished, Anchorage had already perfected the art of forgetting. A city surrounded by wilderness, shaped by oil, and suspended between a frontier myth and a very modern unease. It's a place where people go missing, and the sidewalks keep rolling forward like nothing happened. Samantha was 24 when she disappeared, young enough to be full of plans, old enough to understand how easily they can unravel. She wasn't a tourist, a hiker, or a thrill seeker. She wasn't testing fate in the mountains or walking alone down some backwoods trail. She was in the city. Broad daylight, civilization all around, and still, she disappeared like a mist at sunrise. Her story begins and ends at least as far as the records show in Anchorage on the 1st of November, a gray-skied Monday. The kind of day that slips past unnoticed unless you're looking for something to anchor to. Unfortunately, there's almost nothing to anchor to here. No confirmed last sighting, no security footage, no text messages or surveillance cameras. It was 1993. The internet was barely a rumor, and phones were still attached to walls. All anyone knew was that Samantha didn't come home. She didn't show up to work. She didn't call anyone. One moment she existed, and the next, there was only her name whispered by family, pinned to bulletin boards, and eventually shelved in cold case files that gather more dust than answers. The missing persons report was filed promptly. Her family knew this wasn't normal. Samantha wasn't a wanderer. She was responsible, a steady presence in people's lives. The kind of person who returned calls, kept appointments, showed up when she said she would. She had no history of running off, no signs of emotional distress, no enemies that anyone knew of. Anchorage police launched an investigation. At least, the kind they launch when there's nothing obvious to chase. A few interviews, a few flyers, a few polite conversations with anyone who might have seen her. But the trail was already cold by the time they began. Whatever had happened had left no footprint. What makes Samantha's case particularly unsettling is how little story it even has. Most disappearances come with some kind of narrative: a last sighting, a suspect, a vehicle, a backpack found in a ditch, something. But with Samantha, the void is complete. No one knows where she was going. No one knows who she was with. No one can say for certain what time she vanished. All the classic investigative triggers, phone records, credit card use, security camera footage were useless or non-existent. Police had nothing, and they still don't time. Over the years, her case would flicker back into attention now and then. A new detective would pick up the file, read it over, re-interview some of the same people, come to the same conclusion. No new information, no new leads, nothing to chase. Her family tried to keep her name alive. Year after year, they kept asking the same question: how does someone just disappear in the middle of Anchorage? But the city didn't answer. It never does. And the years kept piling up. Her face, once sharp in the minds of those who loved her, began to fade into age-progressed composites and computer-generated sketches. Portraits of a woman she never got to become. There were no breakthroughs, no suspects, no dramatic DNA matches or anonymous tips. Samantha Kent's case sits like so many others, not unsolved in the active sense, but unsolved in the deeper, lonelier way. The kind where no one's even pretending to solve it anymore. Which leads us to a more difficult truth. Not all disappearances are dramatic. Not all of them are wrapped in scandal or hidden in forest shadows. Some just happen quietly, a blink, a skipped heartbeat. One less person at the dinner table, one less voice on the answering machine. Samantha's case forces an uncomfortable question. How much of a person needs to vanish before we start looking? Because sometimes, it turns out, the scariest disappearances aren't the ones that begin with screaming or blood trails. They're the ones that begin with nothing at all. The ones that whisper, and whispering is what Anchorage does best. There was no forest, no trailhead, no icy river, just a woman in the city, walking out into a Monday and becoming a question. And Anchorage has never been short on questions. Which brings us to the next one. Another woman, another silence, another life paused mid-sentence. Her name was Marianne Alexi, and the night she vanished, she was walking in familiar shoes, right into a part of the city that claims it saw nothing. Marianne Alexi. Anchorage, Alaska. The 10th of October, 2012. The night was cold, but not unusual. Early October in Anchorage is a slow-motion fall, dark by dinner, sharp in the lungs, and thick with the kind of wind that rattles empty signs outside strip malls. It was the kind of night that didn't seem dangerous, just quiet. Marianne Alexi was 33 years old. A mother, a sister, a friend. Originally from Fort Yukon, a Gwich'in-Athabascan village near the Arctic Circle, she had made Anchorage her home, like so many others from rural Alaska who arrive in the city looking for work, connection, and a little more stability than what the remote villages can offer. But the city doesn't always give what it promises. That night, Marianne was walking, not out on a trail or in the wilderness, just walking in the city. Somewhere along the eastern stretch of Anchorage, where concrete turns to shadow and the neighborhoods start to feel more spread out, less watched. She was familiar with the area. She had friends there. There was no reason to expect she wouldn't make it to where she was going. But she didn't. That night, Marianne disappeared. No one saw what happened. Or if they did, no one came forward. Her family quickly raised concerns. This wasn't like her. Marianne was independent, yes, but not careless. She was known to stay in touch with her children, check in regularly with her sister, and keep to a routine that, while modest, was hers. When the calls went unanswered and the days started stacking up, the worry settled in for good. Her disappearance was reported to the police within days. A missing persons bulletin went out, but it never made headlines. Not really. Not in the way some cases do. Her name wasn't trending. There weren't vigils on the news. Just a few articles. A photo. A handful of paragraphs summarizing the basics. Woman, missing, Anchorage, last seen walking. What those articles didn't say, what most of them still don't say, is how common that sentence really is. Because Mary Ann's case is not an anomaly. It's a pattern. Indigenous women in Alaska disappear at rates that defy logic, but not expectation. The phrase, missing and murdered Indigenous women, MMIW, has become a label, a headline category, a catch-all for disappearances like Mary Ann's. But it's also a shield, one that unintentionally normalizes the crisis. When a group of people goes missing so frequently that it becomes a statistic, it gets easier to look away. But Mary Ann wasn't a statistic. She was a person, a full human life, full of details, contradictions, history. She was described by her family as compassionate, resilient, sharp-witted, and deeply connected to her roots. She was known to speak her mind. She worked when she could. She kept close to her children. And she never gave up easily. And yet, nearly everything about her disappearance has been absorbed by silence. Police have never publicly named a suspect. No body has been found. No leads have been confirmed. The assumption, one that hangs over many cold cases like hers, is that foul play was involved. But the word assumption doesn't carry legal weight. It doesn't lead to arrests. It doesn't bring people home. Her family, especially her sister, became vocal advocates not just for Mary Ann, but for other missing women in Alaska. They marched. They raised awareness. They tried to keep her name above the fold. And still, the case remains open, unsolved, and largely unspoken outside of small circles that never stopped caring. As years passed, the trail grew colder. New cases surfaced. New names filled the news cycle. And Mary Ann's photo, a simple, smiling portrait, began to fade into the long catalog of unresolved heartbreaks that Alaska has tucked into its back pocket. What stands out isn't what happened. It's how quietly it happened. How effortlessly the city made room for one less person. How little disruption a disappearance causes when the person who vanishes isn't wealthy or white or loud enough to force the world to listen. Mary Ann Alexi didn't vanish into wilderness. She vanished into urban stillness, into the spaces between buildings, into the cracks in a system that wasn't built to catch women like her when they fall or when they're taken. And now, when people speak her name, they often do it with that cautious phrasing, the one that hides grief under politeness. She went missing, as if she misplaced herself, as if this was an accident. But Mary Ann didn't misplace anything. Something happened. Something no one wants to talk about. Something no one wants to solve loudly enough to shake the ground it would take to find her. And the ground in Anchorage? It's always ready to cover its tracks. Which leads us, again, to a pattern. Another woman, another city block, another absence dressed in silence. Her name is Cassandra Buskovsky, and when she disappeared, she left behind no conflict, no scandal, and no clue. Just the hollow certainty that someone knows exactly why. Cassandra Lee Buskovsky, Anchorage, Alaska, the 7th of August, 2019. By the time Cassandra Buskovsky went missing, people had already stopped pretending it didn't happen in Anchorage. The disappearances, the silences, the names that hover in the air for a few weeks, maybe months, and then dissolve, as if the cold just digests them. It's not that no one cares. It's that no one knows what to do with a vanishing that leaves behind no noise. Cassandra was 44 years old when she vanished. Not a tourist, not a newcomer, a lifelong Alaskan. She had family in the area, knew the rhythms of the city, understood how to navigate both its streets and its silences. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was stable enough. She'd had her struggles, like anyone, but there was nothing especially chaotic about the period leading up to her disappearance. No crisis, no dramatic exits, no red flags. And then, suddenly, no Cassandra. She was last seen somewhere in Anchorage on the 7th of August. That's how most sources phrase it, somewhere, as if the specifics had been swallowed before they were ever written down. There's no timestamp, no confirmed location, just a date and the vague impression that she was out and about, and then she wasn't. Missing person flyers went up soon after. Her family reported her disappearance quickly, but the case, like so many others, seemed to vanish even faster than the person at its center. It was as if Cassandra had been paused mid-scene, and the story just moved on without her. The Anchorage Police Department acknowledged her case. They issued a brief statement, the kind that feels algorithmic, efficient, and incomplete. They asked the public for help, asked for tips, promised to investigate all leads. But if there were leads, they never made it to the surface. There were no confirmed sightings, no camera footage, no recovered belongings, no financial activity, no pings from a phone, no car, no witness, no story. Just a name slowly sinking under the weight of every other unsolved disappearance in Alaska. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it is. Women, particularly Indigenous and Alaska Native women, vanish in this state with such disturbing frequency that missing no longer means urgent. It means one more. It means probably won't get answers. And even, though Cassandra wasn't Native, her case followed the same unsettling trajectory, one where absence becomes the default setting. Her family kept trying. They posted online, contacted local media, called in tips even when they knew they wouldn't be followed up on. But what are you supposed to say when the last sentence you can speak is, "She was here, and then she wasn't"? Cassandra's face appeared briefly in local news. Her missing persons poster made its way through Facebook circles and digital bulletin boards. But in a city where the missing are a category, not an exception, attention is short-lived. The harshest part? Cassandra's case doesn't even have a theory. With most missing persons cases, people speculate. They chase stories, no matter how flimsy. Abduction, accident, foul play, voluntary disappearance. In Cassandra's case, there's nothing, just a void. And in that void, even speculation feels too loud. What we know is that she left behind people who loved her, a family still checking messages, a community wondering how someone so rooted in Anchorage could be uprooted with such surgical precision. No one's been arrested, no one has been publicly named, no remains have been found. She is simply still missing. And what makes it worse, what makes it settle in your chest like ice, is how little has changed in the years since. Cassandra's story is not ancient history. She disappeared in the era of smartphones, GPS, mass surveillance, and interconnected everything. And still, not a single confirmed clue. As if Alaska itself absorbed her. That's what this place does, sometimes. It doesn't just make people disappear. It erases the moment they were last seen, too. Leaves you standing on a timeline with both ends cut off. And when it happens in a city, you can't even blame the mountains. You start looking at the sidewalks, the streetlights, the people who passed her and never looked back. Because someone saw her. Someone always does, whether they admit it or not. But until that silence breaks, Cassandra remains a missing person in the most haunting sense of the word, one who isn't just lost, but unremembered by the world that was supposed to protect her. And if you think the trail of missing women ends there, it doesn't, because just a few months later, another name entered the registry. Another woman, another silence, Pauline Elsie Geary, vanished from Anchorage in December. Different life, same vacuum. Same city, same question. Pauline Elsie Geary. Anchorage, Alaska. The 1st of December, 2019. If you were counting, you'd notice something strange. That within a 4-month stretch between August and December of 2019, 3 women vanished in Anchorage. All adults, all familiar with the city, all women of color, all disappeared without fanfare, without final words, without a single publicly confirmed clue, and none of them were ever found. Pauline Elsie Geary was 69 years old when she went missing. Not a teenager swept up in impulse, not a thrill seeker, or someone living on the edge. She was a mother, a grandmother, a known presence in the city, and someone who didn't just walk away from her life. At her age, with her family ties, she had patterns, predictable rhythms, appointments, people to see. And when she missed them, when she stopped calling, it sent an immediate ripple through her family. She was reported missing on the 1st of December, the same day she was last seen. That detail alone is telling. Most missing persons reports involve a lag hours, sometimes days, before someone calls the police. But not this time. Pauline's absence was so uncharacteristic, so loud in its silence, that her loved ones knew immediately something was off. The Anchorage Police Department acknowledged the report quickly. They issued a bulletin. Pauline was described as 5'2", with gray hair and brown eyes, last seen wearing a red coat. They asked for help locating her. That was it. No suspicious circumstances were listed. No witness reports. No mention of where she was going. Just a missing persons notice and a short description, quietly added to the city's backlog of unsolved disappearances. Searches were organized, some official, some informal. Family and friends canvassed neighborhoods, hung flyers, called local shelters, hospitals, clinics. She wasn't in any of them. Her name was shared in missing persons databases, picked up by social media posts, and circulated in those haunting, ever-growing Facebook groups dedicated to Alaska's missing. But the case never moved. No sightings, no transactions. No one stepped forward to say, "I saw her there," or "She came by." Pauline had simply vanished. One moment, she was part of the fabric of her family. The next, she was air. There's no dramatic crime scene here. No overturned car or discarded belongings. Not even a breadcrumb trail of CCTV footage to stitch together her last hours. Just absence. And that absence, over time, has become the story itself. What do you do when a person disappears and leaves no story behind? People often assume there's always a reason, a fight, a plan, a mental health crisis, something dramatic. But the truth is, some people go missing without any of those things. They just vanish. And when they're older, like Pauline, society is quick to dismiss the urgency. They use phrases like wandered off, or confused, or went voluntarily. It's not malicious, it's just convenient. But Pauline wasn't confused. She wasn't in cognitive decline. She wasn't someone who needed supervision. She was sharp, present, and deeply loved. And she didn't just step out of her life. So why does it feel like the world never truly looked? Part of the answer lies in who Pauline was. Or rather, who she wasn't. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't young enough to fit into the cable news missing woman mold. And that matters more than most people want to admit. Attention follows spectacle. Tragedy needs packaging. And if it doesn't come with the right branding, it fades into the background noise. Her family didn't stop searching. They refused to let her name disappear. Every year, they continue to call for help, for any shred of new information. But the calls have mostly gone unanswered. Whatever happened to Pauline, whether she encountered someone she shouldn't have or something truly random occurred, remains locked behind the city's apathy and winter's fog. And the winter matters here. Because December in Anchorage isn't just cold, it's enveloping. Snow builds up in layers like silence. The days are short, the nights stretch forever. If you wanted to make someone vanish without leaving a trace, you couldn't ask for a better backdrop than early December. That's what makes Pauline's case so quietly devastating, because there is no obvious narrative to cling to, no theory that leads anywhere. Only the awful possibility that she disappeared in the middle of Anchorage in a residential city surrounded by people and no one saw a thing. And if that doesn't make you question how visible anyone truly is, then perhaps this next case will. Because Pauline wasn't the only one reported missing on the 1st of December, 2019. That same day, another woman, Michelle Terry Tugatuk, was finally reported missing too. But she had already been gone for months. Michelle Terry Tugatuk, Anchorage, Alaska, reported missing the 1st of December, 2019. Last seen sometime in August. That gap alone tells you something. When a person disappears and isn't reported missing for 4 months, it isn't just a delay. It's an indictment of systems, of assumptions, of who the world chooses to look for and who it silently lets go. Michelle Terry Tugatuk, 38 years old, native Alaskan, disappeared sometime in August 2019, but no one officially called it in until December. That's nearly 120 days of silence. By the time her name made it to police files, to bulletins, to public awareness, she was already a phantom. Michelle had moved to Anchorage from her hometown of New Stuyahawk, a small village in southwestern Alaska, a place where community still means something, where everyone knows everyone else, and where a disappearance is noticed. But in the city, things are different. People fall through cracks here. Not because they're forgettable, but because those cracks are wide and deep and too often ignored. She had been living with family in Anchorage, moving between homes, trying to get grounded. Michelle wasn't loud. She wasn't high profile. She was one of those people who existed just under the radar, familiar to some, loved by a few, invisible to most. Which is how 4 months can pass without a formal report. There are conflicting reports about when she was last seen. Some sources say late August, others push it back earlier, into midsummer. But everyone agrees on the absence. She stopped showing up, stopped calling, stopped being part of the daily rhythm of the lives around her. It didn't take long for her family to start asking questions. Quiet ones at first, text messages, calls, drive-bys. But when those questions led nowhere, they finally did what they had hoped they wouldn't have to. They filed a missing persons report on the 1st of December. And then came the wait. The Anchorage Police Department acknowledged the report. They posted her name. They asked the public for help, but they were already months behind. There was no crime scene to investigate, no fresh clues to pursue, no camera footage to comb through. Whatever trail Michelle had left behind was already buried under snow and silence. And that silence, it stayed. Her case never received major media coverage. No nightly news segments, no deep dives, no vigils, not even a press conference. Just a few digital flyers passed around on Facebook, occasionally resurfacing when someone remembered. But remembering in Anchorage doesn't guarantee visibility, and visibility doesn't guarantee justice. Michelle's family continued to push. Quietly, but persistently. They searched for her in the way that families do, not with detective tools, but with love and dread. Asking the same questions to the same people, hoping that someone's story would change, that someone's conscience would crack. But no answers came. There were no known conflicts, no reports of threats or violence, no suspicious activity on her bank account, no tips that ever gained traction, just nothing. And that's the most unsettling part. Michelle didn't disappear into the wilderness. She vanished into Anchorage, a city with traffic lights, gas stations, sidewalks, a place where people imagine they're protected by proximity. But if you've followed this story this far, you know the truth. The city doesn't make you safer. It just makes your disappearance quieter. There's no suspect, no declared cause, no theory that police have made public, just a woman who stopped being seen and a city that, once again, didn't seem to notice until it was too late. Some might be tempted to explain it away, that she moved, that she chose to leave, that people disappear all the time. But people don't usually leave everything behind. They don't abandon their identities, their belongings, their families, without a trace. They don't erase themselves completely. That's not how vanishing works. The question no one wants to ask out loud is this: if Michelle had been white, middle class, and well-connected, would the city have started looking sooner? Would the disappearance have been urgent on day 1 instead of day 120? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Because Michelle Terry Tugatuk isn't just a missing person. She's part of a pattern, one that keeps repeating year after year, name after name. And if no one stops to map that pattern, to say it out loud, to demand that it means something, then what exactly are we left with? Another cold case. Another cold season. And another woman's name drifting quietly off the edge of public memory. But not yet. Because we're still remembering, still speaking. And speaking of names, another one had already disappeared just a few months earlier. A woman who told her family she was heading to the airport. A simple plan, a normal day. Her name was Tiffany Trigg. She never boarded a plane, and no one's seen her since. Tiffany Trigg, Anchorage, Alaska, the 27th of August, 2019. It was supposed to be a short trip. That's all. A simple airport drop-off. No drama, no warning signs. Just another Alaskan day winding down under late summer skies, clouds rolling slow, the sun lingering just long enough to fool you into thinking everything was fine. Tiffany Trigg told her family she was heading to the airport. That's the last thing anyone can say for certain. That was the plan. Where she was flying to, who was supposed to meet her, even whether she had a ticket booked, those details have blurred with time and uncertainty, because no one saw her at the airport. No one saw her after she said she was going. And whatever plans she had that day evaporated into a silence that has now lasted years. She vanished on the 27th of August, 2019. The kind of disappearance that doesn't scream, doesn't flare up in headlines, doesn't bring out detectives in trench coats or reporters with microphones. It just simmers, quiet, uneasy, ongoing. Tiffany was 38. A lifelong Alaskan with deep ties to the state, especially the Anchorage area. She was known, loved, and consistent. Not the kind of person who drops everything and walks off the map. Her family described her as warm and vibrant, with a strong personality and a quick wit. She had plans, people who needed her, and no known reason to vanish. But the world doesn't always need a reason. Sometimes, it just opens up underneath someone and swallows them whole. When Tiffany didn't show up where she was supposed to be, her family quickly grew concerned. She wasn't answering calls, wasn't posting online, wasn't in contact with friends. The silence was immediate and total. A vanishing not stretched out over days or weeks, but happening all at once, like the lights going out in a single flicker. She was reported missing shortly after, and the Anchorage Police Department opened a case. A standard missing persons bulletin was released. It asked the public for information, but there were no concrete leads. There was no airport footage, no trace of her name on a flight manifest, no sightings from TSA agents or airline personnel. It was like she never made it that far. The assumption, then, was that something happened before she reached the airport. Somewhere between wherever she started and wherever she was headed, the road twisted and she disappeared. But where? And how? Tiffany's disappearance wasn't the kind that lent itself to wild speculation. There was no high-speed chase, no cryptic messages, no obvious suspect, just absence. One moment she was in contact, the next, she wasn't. That's it. That's all there ever was. There were rumors, of course. There always are. Anchorage has a way of metabolizing tragedy through whispers. People say she might have planned to leave town. Others say she was seen with someone unfamiliar. Some think she was picked up and never dropped off. But nothing has ever been confirmed. No one has stepped forward. No one has been arrested. The family kept searching. They put up flyers, shared her face on social media, kept her name in circulation in the small, exhausted network of Alaskans who know too well what it feels like to lose someone into thin air. But the leads never came. And the same city she disappeared in, kept moving, as it always does. Anchorage isn't cruel, exactly. It just has a short memory. Too many missing names, too many quiet exits. After a while, the silence just becomes another part of the landscape. And in that landscape, Tiffany's story sits like an unanswered question. Not dramatic, not explosive, just unresolved. Why would someone make up a trip to the airport? Why would someone vanish on the way to a place built entirely around schedules, manifests, and tickets? And if she never planned to fly, what was she walking into? Her family still doesn't know. And there's something almost too perfect, in the worst way, about her disappearing on the 27th of August, because it was the tail end of summer, that specific moment when Alaska starts tilting back toward the dark. The tourists leave, the temperature drops, and the city gets quieter. You can feel the season changing, like a held breath before the long silence. No trace of Tiffany has ever been found. No remains, no belongings, no credit card activity. Her name hasn't popped up in any official capacity since that day. Her image, though, still circulates, a steady reminder that she hasn't been forgotten, even if she hasn't been found. And if her story feels incomplete, that's because it is. She's not a chapter, she's a cliffhanger, and the people who loved her are still waiting for the next page. But in Alaska, those pages often go unwritten. And before that summer faded completely, another name was added to the same cruel list. A man, this time. Not a tourist, not a teenager. A grown adult vanished with his vehicle still warm in the driveway, as if he had only stepped out for a moment and forgotten how to return. His name was Kevin Lynn Mitchell. Kevin Lynn Mitchell. Anchorage, Alaska. The 22nd of September, 2015. Sometimes the vanishing doesn't look like a mystery at first. Sometimes it looks like a man stepping out for a drive. Normal clothes, normal truck, a plan for the day, or maybe no plan at all, just the casual aimlessness of someone running errands or clearing their head. Kevin Lynn Mitchell left his home in Anchorage on a Tuesday. He drove off in a silver Toyota Tundra. He never came back. And the strangest part? It took a while for anyone to realize something was wrong. Kevin was 45 years old at the time, a longtime Anchorage resident, quiet by most accounts, responsible, private. He didn't live loudly, didn't cause waves. He lived with his fiancée, who described him as steady, present, and grounded. There was nothing unusual about the morning of the 22nd of September. No fight, no sudden mood swing, no urgent phone calls, just Kevin getting into his truck and leaving. Except the normal things didn't follow. He didn't answer texts. He didn't call to check in. And when night fell and he still hadn't returned, that familiar anxiety, the kind that starts in your stomach and climbs slowly up your spine, began to set in. By the next morning, Kevin's fiancée had reported him missing. The Anchorage police began their investigation promptly. It wasn't the kind of case you could delay. Kevin wasn't the type to just vanish. He had no known enemies, no criminal background, no hint of trouble brewing. He had a home, a job, a routine. The search began with his house. That's where things got even stranger. All of Kevin's personal items were still at home. His wallet, his keys, his phone. Items most people carry with them out of habit, even if they're just stepping out for a few hours. And yet, he had left them all behind. The only thing gone was Kevin himself and his truck. Investigators thought maybe he'd gone somewhere with someone, maybe a friend was driving, maybe he got into someone else's car. But there was no activity on his phone, no calls placed, no security camera footage showing him leaving in another vehicle. And Kevin, by all accounts, wasn't the type to leave without his essentials, especially not his phone. Then came a twist. Several days later, his truck was found. It wasn't abandoned in some distant part of the state or dumped in the wilderness. It was discovered, still in Anchorage, parked, locked, not hidden, not wrecked, not burned out, just is there. As if he had simply finished running an errand, walked away, and never looked back. There was nothing inside that gave police a clue. No note, no sign of distress, no DNA or fingerprints from anyone other than Kevin. The vehicle was intact, clean, and offered no trail. Wherever he went, however he left it, the truck was the only physical remnant of his last known movement, and it said absolutely nothing. That silence only grew more suffocating as weeks turned into months, and months into years. There were no confirmed sightings. No one came forward. No evidence of foul play, but no evidence of safety either. Kevin didn't access his bank account. He didn't use his ID. He didn't leave digital traces behind. It was as if he had stepped sideways out of reality and taken the explanation with him. His fiancée was devastated. She spoke publicly, describing him as kind, thoughtful, and reliable. She couldn't think of a single reason why he would have walked away from the life they'd built together. Not without a word, not without a sign. The two were planning a future, buying groceries, paying bills, living a quiet, shared life that now felt abruptly paused mid-sentence. Over the years, the case has remained open, but stagnant. Anchorage police list Kevin as a missing person. His photo remains in circulation among Alaska's cold cases, but no new information has surfaced. No sightings, no tips, no theories strong enough to hold weight. Which brings us to a deeper question. What does it mean when a person leaves their whole identity at home, drives off into the day, and is never seen again? Does it mean a decision was made? Or that something happened before the decision could be taken back? The truth is, in Alaska, there's a long history of people disappearing in ways that make no sense. Where nothing feels violent, but everything feels wrong. Where the clues don't conflict, they just don't exist. Kevin's story isn't one of chaos, it's one of absence. A man walks out the door, leaves behind the things that define him, and never comes back. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's happening again. Just a few years later, in a different Alaskan city, Juno, another woman, stepped outside, into a known downtown street, spoke briefly with two men, and then disappeared like her name was never spoken again. Her name was Tracy Lynn Day. Tracy Lynn Day. Juneau, Alaska. The 14th of February, 2019. Valentine's Day. The day the world is supposed to overflow with warmth, affection, and too many cheap roses. But in Juneau, under the wet slush of winter and the flickering street lamps of Franklin Street, it was a day that slipped cold and quiet into the city's unsolved archive. A day Tracy Lynn Day disappeared. She was 49 years old, a longtime Juneau resident with roots in both the city and the surrounding Native community. Tracy had a past like anyone, hard years, healing years, but by all accounts, she was stable, in regular contact with friends, and trying to hold steady. She was last seen downtown near the bustling, if weather-worn, commercial corridor of Franklin Street. The area is known for its shops, bars, and cruise season buzz, but in mid-February, it's mostly locals and silence. The official report says she was seen speaking with two men. No names, no confirmed identities, just two men. That's all we're given. Some reports say it looked casual, a brief conversation. Nothing confrontational, no shouting, no body language to raise alarms. And then, Then she was gone. She didn't show up to appointments. She didn't contact her family. She didn't update social media. Calls went unanswered. Her friends began to worry. That worry became a police report. That report became a missing persons case. And the case, like so many in Alaska, became a cold one before the public even caught wind of it. No camera footage was released. No timelines offered. No suspect sketches. It was as if the moment she stepped into that conversation, the narrative hit a wall. 1 minute she was part of Juneau's rhythm, the next, she was just a name on a flyer. The Juneau Police Department issued a few statements in the weeks following her disappearance. They asked for help, encouraged tips, promised a thorough investigation, but it never moved forward. No arrests. No leads announced. No trace of Tracy. Her family and community members organized local searches, foot patrols, beach combs, trail checks. But in a city like Juneau, hemmed in by dense forest, steep mountains, and unpredictable water, you could be one wrong step from gone forever. The geography swallows clues like it's second nature. Tracy's disappearance didn't make national news, not even regional headlines for long. And that silence becomes part of the pattern women of color, especially Indigenous women, vanish, and the public shrugs. There's a resigned fatigue in Alaska around these cases, as though they're inevitable, but they're not. They're just unanswered. And it's not just about who vanishes, it's about how the story gets told. Tracy wasn't a drifter. She wasn't living recklessly. She was walking in her own city, speaking to people on a sidewalk. The very fact that she could disappear from something so ordinary is what should scare us. But in Alaska, the ordinary becomes the vanishing point all too often. Her case remains open, her name remains in the system, but the investigation? It's quiet, like the tide slowly pulling away from the shore and leaving nothing behind but smooth, cold stones. And as the city moved on, as snow melted and cruise ships returned, another case quietly took shape on the other side of the tree line. Another man stepped into the Juneau wilderness alone, familiar with the trails, dressed for a hike, and was never seen again. His name was Frederick Harrison Howard. Frederick Harrison Howard. Juneau, Alaska. The 10th of August, 2009. He told someone he was going hiking. That's what they all say. It's the go-to sentence when you live in a place like Juneau. Bordered by water on one side and steep wilderness on the other, it's a city pressed between two silences, the sea and the forest. On the 10th of August, 2009, Frederick Harrison Howard stepped into the forest. He never stepped back out. Frederick, 51 years old, wasn't a stranger to the outdoors. Born and raised in Alaska, he knew the terrain, the hazards, the difference between a well-marked trail and an animal track. He was last seen at or near the DuPont Trail, a rugged stretch of trail that weaves south from Juneau's Thane area, hugging the edge of Tongass National Forest and skirting the waterline of Gastineau Channel. It's not an especially long trail. It's not known for being dangerous, but on the wrong day, with the wrong weather, and the right amount of bad luck, it can turn on you, especially if you're alone. No one's quite sure when he entered the trail. There was no official trip log, no check-in, no alarm raised until he failed to show up for appointments later that week. Then the worry started. Once authorities realized he was missing, a formal search began. Helicopters, ground teams, K-9 units, the usual script. The trail was combed, the shoreline checked. The cabins and campgrounds in the area were visited and questioned. Nothing. No backpack, no clothing, no signs of distress. Just a man who knew what he was doing and still disappeared. Friends and family refused to accept that he had simply gotten lost. Frederick was experienced. He had hiked that area before. He knew the drop-offs, the weather patterns, the way fog can make the forest fold in on itself. And yet, all that experience didn't save him. Some suggested he may have wandered off trail. Others floated the idea of a medical emergency, a heart attack, a fall. But there was never a body, never a signal, no evidence of an accident. Just absence, the kind Alaska is so good at creating. His family described him as quiet, reliable, and connected to his community. He didn't have enemies. He wasn't running from anything. He was just going for a hike. And that phrase, just going for a hike, has taken on a chilling weight in Alaska, because it's the beginning of so many endings, so many cold cases, a benign sentence that becomes a last known fact. Frederick's disappearance faded into the folds of Juneau's landscape. His name still appears on missing persons lists, but the trail, both literal and investigative, has long gone cold. Which might explain why, when another Juneau resident went missing in 2024, everyone already knew how the story would go. Because in Alaska, even the newest disappearances echo the oldest ones. Corey Blaine Coleman, Juneau, Alaska. The 10th of January, 2024. The calendar had barely turned. Snow still crusted the sidewalks. Christmas lights clung stubbornly to porch rails. In the early days of January, most people are still making promises they won't keep. And while most of the world wasn't watching, Corey Coleman went missing. Corey was 39 years old, no stranger to Juneau's gray winters or its unpredictable rhythms. Described by friends as thoughtful and introspective, Corey wasn't the type to vanish on a whim. But then again, that description fits almost everyone on this list. What's strange about Corey's case isn't how he disappeared, it's how little is known even now. He was last seen on the 10th of January. Where? That part's hazy. Some say near the Douglas Bridge. Others mention seeing him in the valley area. The police haven't confirmed either location publicly. What they did confirm was that Corey had no known travel plans, no medical emergencies, and no personal issues, at least none that would explain a sudden and complete vanishing. He didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note. His car was found later in a public parking area. Locked, empty, clean, no signs of struggle, no signs of planning. It was as if he'd parked, stepped out to run a short errand, and simply didn't return. Search teams checked the nearby shoreline. Drones were deployed. Calls went out to the public. The response was lukewarm, not out of apathy, but because no one seemed to know where to begin. There was no starting point, no trail to follow, no final phone call, just a timestamp and a void. Friends and family insisted this wasn't like him. He wasn't mentally unwell. He wasn't trying to disappear. He was planning a trip later in the month, had groceries in the fridge, and had been texting back and forth with friends the day before. Nothing, absolutely nothing indicated that he was about to become a missing person. And yet, here we are. As of now, Corey remains one of Juneau's most recent disappearances. His case is active, but progress has been minimal. No confirmed sightings, no new updates, just the standard flyer, the waiting. The feeling of déjà vu that comes with every case like this because Juneau's seen this story before. It just keeps getting new names. And with each new name, the silence grows a little heavier. Next on that list, a man who went into the water and was never pulled back out. Except this time, the others were saved, just not him. James Christopher Cole, Juneau, Alaska. The 5th of December, 2017, it started on the water. Not the wild sea, but the inland calm Gastineau Channel. A narrow ribbon of icy water separating Juneau from Douglas Island, winding slow and deep beneath the city's modest skyline. It's not the kind of place where people vanish, not usually. But on a frigid December night in 2017, James Christopher Cole became the exception. James, 39, had taken a skiff out into the channel with 2 others. A small boat, nothing fancy. Locals do it all the time, short hops across the water, either for errands or just movement. It's quicker than the bridge and more personal than waiting on anyone's schedule. And this was James's home. He knew the tides, the turns, the way the wind stiffens your jaw the moment you're 10 feet offshore. He was no tourist. But that night, something went wrong. The skiff capsized. The other 2 men aboard, they were rescued. Cold, shaken, but alive. James wasn't. He vanished beneath the water. No one saw exactly what happened in the moment the boat flipped. No dramatic mayday call, no flare into the sky. Just chaos, cold water, and the kind of panic that compresses time. Search and rescue responded quickly. The Coast Guard scoured the channel. Divers went in. Boats equipped with sonar dragged the area. Helicopters traced the shorelines and open water. For days they searched, but James never surfaced. No body, no belongings, just an open stretch of water and a blank spot where his name used to be. Authorities eventually presumed him drowned. A logical conclusion, perhaps, but a troubling one too, because logical doesn't mean certain, not in Alaska. Gastineau Channel is deep in places, swift in others. The tidal currents push and pull unpredictably, especially in winter. A body lost in the water can travel miles. It can vanish completely. And the idea that someone could disappear just a few hundred yards from shore, within eyesight of their own city, and still never be found, that's what keeps families up at night. James's family never fully accepted the word presumed. They wanted confirmation. They wanted answers. But they got silence instead. And in time, his name quietly joined the list of those who went missing in a place where they were supposed to be safe. Because sometimes, the water doesn't give back what it takes. And sometimes, it takes 2 at once. George Ryan Johnson. Near Juneau, Alaska Mendenhall Towers, the 5th of March, 2018. If James Cole's disappearance haunts the shoreline, George Ryan Johnson's vanishing is embedded in the clouds, higher, colder, sharper. The place where the earth stops being ground and becomes something far less predictable. George was an elite climber, not just competent, renowned. The kind of man who didn't just visit the mountains, but studied them, moved through them like he'd been born in their shadow. He was 34 when he and his climbing partner, a friend, a fellow adventurer, set out for Mendenhall Towers, an iconic series of jagged granite spires just north of Juneau. This wasn't a spontaneous hike, it was a planned technical ascent. Ropes, gear, experience, the works. They'd done climbs before, they'd done this climb before. But on the 5th of March, 2018, the weather didn't agree. Conditions were harsh. Cold air dropped fast, winds surged over the ridges, and visibility narrowed to the width of your hand. Somewhere in that unforgiving geometry of stone and sky, George and his partner went missing. Search and rescue teams were deployed within days. Helicopters were flown in. Avalanche risk slowed the ground search. Teams had to balance the desperate need to recover the climbers with the risk of sending more people into unstable terrain. Drones were used. High-powered lenses scanned cliff faces. Ice fields were analyzed for signs of movement, color, anything human. Nothing. To this day, neither climber has been found. No gear, no trace, no final signal. It's as if the mountain, unimpressed by skill or planning, simply absorbed them. Some theorize they fell into a crevasse. Others suggest they may have been caught in a slide, buried under tons of snow and ice. But with no evidence, even theories feel flimsy. Mountains, especially Alaskan ones, are masters of concealment. George's family, deeply rooted in both climbing and the state, held memorials. But the word closure was never used. You can't close a door that never swung open to begin with. And in the climbing world, their disappearance struck hard. Because if he could vanish someone so trained, so cautious, then what does that say about the rest of us? You might think this kind of story only happens in extreme places, high peaks, icy water. But Alaska doesn't need a mountain to make someone disappear. Sometimes all it takes is a truck, a tank of gas, and a quiet road outside of Fairbanks. John William McClelland. North Pole, Alaska Fairbanks area. The 14th of August, 2020. The last confirmed thing anyone can say about John McClelland happened at a gas pump. He used his debit card at a station in Fairbanks. Security footage showed his red truck pulling in, fueling up, and then driving away. Normal, mundane. The kind of errand you forget 5 minutes after doing it. But for John, 53 years old, a lifelong Alaskan, it was the last move he ever made. He left behind a trail so faint it barely existed. No texts, no calls, no signs of distress. 1 minute, he was in town. The next, he was a mystery. His family expected him home that evening. When he didn't arrive, they assumed a delay. Maybe he stopped to visit someone. Maybe the truck had issues. Maybe. But when the hours turned to days and his phone stayed dark, they called the police. The official search started with the basics. They traced his bank card last used at that gas station, checked his house, searched the usual roads between North Pole and Fairbanks. Nothing. No sign of the truck, no pings, just a man who'd left home for errands and never returned. Weeks later, a new tip arrived. His vehicle had possibly been seen near a wooded area, not far from town. Authorities checked. It wasn't there. Months passed. The story stayed still. No evidence of foul play. No evidence of a plan to leave. Just a man known for reliability. One who loved his family, who didn't take risks, who left home like any other day and never walked back through the door. Eventually, even theories stopped showing up. And the red truck, the one that should have stood out on Alaska's long roads, may as well have been painted with invisibility. John's disappearance didn't make statewide headlines. It was overshadowed, like many cases, by the pandemic, by politics, by the sheer volume of people who go missing in Alaska every year. But his name is still spoken. Quietly, in the town of North Pole. On birthdays, at dinner tables, during drives past the same gas station where he was last seen. And maybe that's the hardest part. The idea that someone can be alive, accounted for, absolutely fine at 3:14 p.m., and then become a permanent question mark by sunset. But it happens, over and over again. And just 4 days later, in the same region, it happened again. This time, to a woman named Deborah Sue Nicktoon. Deborah Sue Nicktoon. Fairbanks, Alaska. The 18th of August, 2020. It was late summer in Fairbanks, the kind of season that tries to trick you too early for snow, too late for trust. The leaves begin to dry out and the light shifts, casting longer shadows through the streets of a city that's learned how to live with silence. On the 18th of August, 2020, Deborah Sue Nicktoon walked out of the Northward building and into one of those shadows. She was 56 years old, a mother, a sister, a quiet, consistent presence in the lives of the people who knew her. Deborah had roots in Fairbanks, deep ones. She wasn't passing through. She wasn't lost. She wasn't trying to disappear, and yet she did. The Northward building is a prominent fixture in downtown Fairbanks. Not glamorous, but known. A multi-story brick building that houses apartments, businesses, and community services. Deborah was familiar with it. She'd been there before. On that particular day, no one thought twice about seeing her there. It was routine. And then, she was gone. No loud exit, no confrontation, no message left behind. She simply didn't show up to where she was supposed to be next, didn't make her usual calls, didn't go home. And when her family tried to find her, the only thing they found was that she had vanished somewhere between the city's foot traffic and the silence of a Fairbanks afternoon. When Deborah was reported missing, local authorities treated it seriously, at least in theory. A woman disappearing from a central location like downtown Fairbanks should have left behind a trail, footage. witnesses, activity. But there was nothing. No sign of her exiting the building in distress. No indication that she had gotten into a car. No confirmed sightings after she walked through that door. Her phone? Silent. Her bank account? Untouched. Her routines? Broken, in a way that couldn't be explained. The police followed leads, talked to people, but Fairbanks has its own rules. It's a city that feels like a village, where everyone knows someone who's gone missing. That kind of familiarity numbs urgency. There's a quiet acceptance here, not agreement, just endurance that some people vanish and stay that way. But Deborah's family didn't accept that. They put up flyers, asked questions, kept pushing. They described her as kind, gentle, someone who wouldn't just walk away, someone who deserved answers. But the system was already turning cold. Her case quickly joined the ranks of the unconfirmed, the unresolved, the barely remembered. No major searches were launched, no statewide alerts. Her name made local news, briefly, then slipped off the scroll like so many others. And today, there is still no trace. Not even speculation, just the known facts. A woman went into a building and was never seen again. Her face is still listed on missing person registries. Her photo is clear mid-50-second, strong features, thoughtful eyes. And yet, she's become part of a growing category in Alaska, the everyday vanished. Not high profile, not dramatic, just gone. And her disappearance didn't happen in isolation, because only months before, on a different day, in the same city, another woman left home in a moment of disorientation and was never seen again. Her name was Mariellen C. McMillan. Mariellen C. McMillan. Fairbanks, Alaska. The 21st of November, 1998. There's something about November in Fairbanks. The light gets thinner. The cold sets in for good. You begin to notice how easily sound disappears in snow. And on the 21st of November, 1998, Mariellen McMillan left her home in what witnesses described as a confused state and disappeared into that silence. She was 47 years old at the time, not a tourist, not a stranger to winter. Fairbanks was her home. She knew the streets, the shortcuts, the neighborhoods that stayed lit a little longer into the dark season. She wasn't prone to wandering. But that morning, something changed. Reports say she left on foot. Alone, no vehicle, no coat, which raised alarms right away. She was dressed lightly, too lightly for the temperature, and she didn't take her purse, keys, or identification. Some called it a mental health episode. Others weren't so sure. Regardless, she stepped out of her house and into one of the coldest cases Fairbanks has ever carried. The first few hours were crucial and lost, because people didn't panic right away. They thought maybe she'd return, maybe she just needed space. It wasn't until she failed to show up to planned events, to call back family, to walk back through the door, that concern turned to fear. By then, snow had already fallen. Search and rescue teams were mobilized, dogs were brought in, helicopters flew over the wooded areas surrounding the city. Her neighborhood was canvassed, doors were knocked on. But Mariellen had vanished completely, and perhaps most eerily, so had her car. Not just her car. A vehicle doesn't just disappear, especially not in Fairbanks, where every road has a dead end and even off-road trails have limits. Her car was never recovered, not found in a ditch, not abandoned near a trailhead, not towed or impounded. It was just gone. There were no known conflicts in her life, no pending lawsuits, no criminal history, no signs of substance use, nothing that made her a flight risk, nothing that explained how a woman could leave home one morning, alone and unprepared for the cold, and then completely vanish along with her car. The investigation hit a wall almost immediately. With no signs of struggle, no digital trail to follow, This was 1998, before the world was easily traceable, and no one claiming to have seen her. The case cooled fast. Cold, in this case, being both literal and metaphorical. Her family kept asking questions. Years passed. Theories came and went, but there was never a breakthrough, never a tip that gained momentum. Just the occasional resurfacing of her name, attached to the same questions, echoing with the same absence. Mariellen's face is now part of that haunting grid, the one you see on state websites and awareness posters. A reminder that Alaska doesn't always need distance to make someone disappear. Sometimes, you can live just minutes from downtown and still get erased. Her family still holds out hope. Not for a miracle, exactly. Just an answer, a piece of the puzzle, closure, in whatever shape it wants to arrive. But Fairbanks has other plans. Because just over 2 decades later, same city, same eerily quiet disappearance, another person walked out of view and into the long archive of the missing. His name was Willis Edwin Derendoff. Willis Edwin Derendoff. Fairbanks, Alaska. The 10th of November, 2020. The most unsettling part wasn't how he disappeared. It was how quickly it went unnoticed. One day, Willis Edwin Derendoff was just another face in Fairbanks. The next, he was a question no one could answer. No drama, no build-up. Just another ordinary day on Old Airport Way, and then silence. He was 34 years old, originally from Huslia, a Koyukon Athabascan village on the Koyukuk River, but living in Fairbanks at the time. He wasn't a stranger to the city. He wasn't isolated. He had a job, a routine, people who knew his name and noticed when he wasn't around. And yet, on the 10th of November, 2020, he vanished like the wind had decided to sweep one name off the sidewalk. The last confirmed sighting of Willis was somewhere near Old Airport Way, a major thoroughfare that cuts through West Fairbanks. It's not rural, not remote. You can get a burger, fill your tank, do your banking, and drive home in under 10 minutes. It's a road for errands, not mysteries. But that's where Willis was seen, and that's where the trail ends. He was walking, they say. Nothing unusual. No signs of distress. Just heading somewhere. He didn't appear lost. Didn't ask for help. Didn't appear to be running from anything. Then he simply stopped being seen. By the next day, the worry started. Friends and family realized he hadn't shown up where he said he would. No phone calls. No social media posts. No texts. That might not be alarming for everyone, but for Willis, it was wrong. It wasn't like him. The missing person report was filed soon after. Police began an investigation, but if there were leads, they never saw daylight. There were no known medical concerns, no recent arguments. No suggestion that he had planned to leave town or disappear voluntarily. Willis hadn't made withdrawals from his bank account. His phone had gone silent. No one saw him boarding a bus or walking into the woods. His name just flickered off the grid. Local searches were conducted informal at first. Family members put up posters, walked the routes he used to take, talked to friends, neighbors, businesses along Old Airport Way. Nothing. No one had seen him. Or if they had, they weren't saying. Fairbanks isn't enormous. It doesn't take long for word to spread, and yet somehow, Willis's disappearance got buried quickly beneath other headlines, other stories. The world was still mid-pandemic. In November 2020, the volume of daily noise drowned out almost everything else. But for his family, the silence only got louder. To this day, there's been no official breakthrough. No surveillance footage released. No suspects named. No public theory offered by law enforcement. Just an active case. Still open, still unsolved. Willis's family, especially his mother and extended community in Huslia, have tried to keep his name visible. They've continued searching, continued asking. But as more time passes, the weight of the unknown only grows heavier. And perhaps the scariest part is that he disappeared in the city, in daylight, on a busy street, surrounded by people. But none of them saw enough, or said enough, and the silence that swallowed Willis Darendoff didn't go back to sleep. Because just 2 years later, it reached out again. A young man named Christopher Gerhard Baisley clocked out of work and never made it home. Christopher Gerhard Baisley, Fairbanks, Alaska. The 7th of December, 2022. He was 40 years old. A Walmart employee, an outdoorsman, a creature of habit, not the kind of man who disappeared. That was what made it so strange and so familiar when Christopher Baisley finished his shift on a cold December day and vanished without a trace. Christopher was last seen at work. He finished his day like normal, punched out, said goodbye to coworkers. Nothing strange, no arguments, no odd behavior. No sign that this day would be any different from the hundreds of others he'd worked. But he didn't go home, and no one has seen him since. There was talk that he may have gone hiking. He loved the outdoors. Fairbanks, with its endless trails and back roads, was his playground. He knew where to go, what to pack, how to survive. It wouldn't have been unusual for him to head out for a few hours after work to get some air, clear his head, enjoy the silence. But it was December. Temperatures had dropped. Daylight was scarce. This wasn't the kind of day you wandered off into the woods without telling anyone. And that's the part that never made sense. His car was found parked near a popular trail access point, though police have never officially confirmed where. Inside, everything was in place. Nothing stolen. No signs of struggle. No note. No indication of intent. It was as if he'd parked, zipped up his coat, and stepped into the trees with full confidence that he'd be back in time for dinner. But the forest had other plans. Search teams were dispatched. Locals volunteered. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned the area with infrared sensors. The police coordinated with park rangers and nearby landowners. But they found nothing. No footprints, no trail, no discarded gear. Just the stillness of winter and the echo of a missing name. Christopher's family still searches, still calls, still holds out hope. Not because they don't understand the odds, but because not knowing is worse. They don't want a theory, they want a truth. They've described him as dependable, grounded, the kind of person who doesn't vanish, which, of course, is exactly what people say right before a person becomes a file number. As of today, no new evidence has emerged. No sightings, no use of his ID or credit cards, nothing from cameras, nothing from the land. And so, Christopher Baisley remains where Alaska puts so many of its lost in that in-between place, missing, but not declared dead, remembered, but not found, searched for, but not seen. And if that wasn't enough, if Fairbanks hadn't already given its fill of unanswered disappearances the very same year, another woman walked away from a friend's house and never walked back into her life. Her name was Shanna Marie Oman. Shanna Marie Oman. Fairbanks, Chena Hot Springs Road, Alaska, the 3rd of June 4th, 2019. Somewhere between nightfall and morning, she disappeared. Not in the wilderness, exactly. Not in the city. But in that gray zone in between where neighborhoods give way to tree lines and people pass each other in pickups without ever exchanging a word. Shanna Marie Oman was 43, a Fairbanks local. Trusted, known, with friends and family who would have noticed if she'd intended to leave. And when she vanished in early June of 2019, that's exactly what happened. People noticed because she wasn't the kind of person who ghosted her life. She had spent the evening of the 3rd of June at a friend's house near Chena Hot Springs Road, a quiet, wooded area just outside of Fairbanks. They talked, hung out, the usual. Around midnight, she left. That's the last confirmed fact. Her phone pinged one last time around. Mile 17, a stretch of road surrounded by thick forest, broken by occasional driveways and not much else. After that, silence. No more pings, no texts, no calls. The next morning, she didn't return home. Her family called her phone, went looking. Nothing. They reported her missing that same day. Police followed the digital trail. That single ping gave them a starting point. They searched the area around mile 17 with dogs, drones, foot patrols. Locals joined in. ATVs were used. Trails were checked. Ditches, culverts, creek beds. But no trace of Shanna. Her vehicle wasn't located. No personal items, no signs of distress. Just the final blip of a phone signal and then gone. Theories emerged. She got a ride with someone. She wandered off. She ran into the wrong person. But no one could prove anything. And without a body, without a witness, everything became speculation. Her family has never stopped looking. They've kept her name in the public eye, kept asking, kept hoping. But years later, no new clues have surfaced. Like so many others in Fairbanks, Shanna vanished not into wilderness, but into the space where civilization pretends to be safe. And that illusion broke again, just 2 months later. Another disappearance. Another vanishing between destinations. This time, it was Frank Harding Minano Jr. Frank Harding Minano Jr. Between Fairbanks and Nenana, Alaska, the 17th of August, 2020. When Frank Harding Minano Jr. went missing, the road gave more questions than answers. A single stretch of highway connecting two communities, Fairbanks to Nenana, and somewhere in the blur between mile markers and wilderness, Frank vanished. No witnesses, no flashing headlines, just an abandoned car and a broken-into cabin, and the aching absence of a man whose trail stopped before the story began. He was 38 years old, part of the Minto and Nenana tribal communities. Frank was no stranger to the area. He'd driven that road before, knew the terrain, knew the people. He had family in both cities, and on the morning of the 17th of August, 2020, he was on the move, alone in his vehicle, likely heading from one familiar place to another. He never arrived. His vehicle was later found, oddly parked near the halfway point between the two towns off the main road, not crashed or damaged, but left as if its driver had simply walked away. That already raised alarms. Frank wasn't known to abandon his belongings. He wasn't transient. His life, while private, had structure. This wasn't routine. But what made it worse, stranger, was the cabin. Nearby, searchers discovered that a local cabin had been broken into. It wasn't ransacked, but it had clearly been entered. Supplies were disturbed, signs of recent use. No one was there. Authorities couldn't confirm if it was Frank who entered, but the implication lingered. Had he taken shelter? Had something gone wrong, and this cabin was a last attempt at refuge? If so, why didn't he stay? Search efforts began shortly after the discovery. State troopers, tribal police, and volunteers combed the area. The land between Fairbanks and Nenana isn't vast in the traditional sense, but it's unforgiving. A patchwork of forest, wetlands, and river channels that can erase footprints in a matter of hours. Helicopters flew over, ATVs crawled through brush, boats scanned riverbanks in case he had followed a waterway. Nothing, not a single confirmed sign of Frank. There was no evidence of a struggle, no notes, no calls. His phone went silent the day he disappeared. No one reported seeing him on foot, no one picked him up, no one apparently was there. His family, devastated but relentless, kept pressure on the authorities. They conducted independent searches, talked to locals, issued public calls for help, but the leads were minimal. A few possible sightings here and there, none verified. The story began to fade into the folds of the interior, and the questions kept multiplying. If Frank had gotten lost, why didn't he stay in the cabin? If he'd been in trouble, why didn't he call anyone? If he was trying to get somewhere, why did he leave the only shelter in the area? There are no answers, just echoes. His photo still appears on missing persons databases, and his family still calls his name during gatherings, still tells stories about him around the fire, still wonders where the road actually ended that day. But Frank Minano Jr., like so many before him, was simply swallowed, not by a storm, not by some dramatic collapse of order, just by a state that makes disappearance feel ordinary. And only 3 months prior, someone else had gone missing in a place where water erases evidence even faster than time does. A young man who followed his dog toward a river and never came back. Alfaz Sajid Khan. Fairbanks, Alaska, Tanana, and Chinna River confluence. May 10th, 2020. It began with a dog. That morning, Alfaz Sajid Khan was out walking near the confluence of the Tanana and Chinna rivers, where two cold, fast-moving bodies of water meet just outside Fairbanks. His dog had gotten loose. That's how it started. A regular outing, a loose leash, a pet veering too close to the water's edge. And then, just like that, a disappearance. Alfaz was 22 years old, born in Bangladesh, raised in Alaska, a recent college graduate with his life just beginning to crystallize. He was thoughtful, gentle, smart, not the kind of person who took foolish risks. He loved his dog. He loved the land. He wasn't out there for thrill-seeking. He was just trying to get his dog back. Witnesses reported seeing Alfaz chasing the dog toward the riverbank. He disappeared into the brush, and within seconds, he was gone. No scream, no splash anyone could confirm, just absence. Rescue teams were alerted quickly. This wasn't a case that took days to notice. Friends, family, emergency responders were on site within hours. Boats were deployed, divers went in, helicopters scanned the shoreline. The rivers were too fast for clear answers and too cold for hope to last long. The working theory, he fell in. The river took him. The current at the confluence is vicious, the kind of water that pulls down and doesn't let go. It's a theory that makes sense, but there's a problem. They never found him. No body, no clothing, no phone, no signs. Not even the dog. That part made the whole thing harder to accept, because the dog vanished too. You can't help but wonder, how does that happen? One moment you're chasing a runaway pet, the next you and the animal both blink out of existence. There were no signs of foul play, no reason to believe anyone else was involved, but no evidence to confirm anything else either. It became one of those cases where the theory felt sufficient, but the details didn't line up. Alfaz was young, strong, a swimmer, the kind of person who should have been able to shout, to grab a branch, to be seen. But there was no sound, no second chance. Just a ripple in the water, and then the river closed over the story like it had never happened at all. His parents were crushed. They organized extended searches well beyond the official window. Boats kept going out. Side-scan sonar was used. But the Tanana is long and quiet and cruel. To this day, nothing's been recovered. There's a memorial bench near the river now. Just a simple wooden seat facing the water. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't offer answers. It just waits. And that waiting, in Alaska, often becomes the story. Because only 4 years earlier, on the opposite end of the state, in Nome, a man walked off for an evening walk after work and never returned. A law clerk, a missing file, a vanished man with no enemies. His name was Joseph Balderas. Joseph Balderas. Nome, Alaska, the 24th of June, 2016. It was a summer evening in Nome, not warm by most standards, but gentle enough for a walk. Joseph Balderas, a 36-year-old law clerk, stepped outside. No big announcement, no luggage. Just a walk, maybe to clear his head, maybe just part of his routine. He never came back. He worked for the public defender's office, a position that didn't make him famous, but did make him visible. In a town as small as Nome, a man in that job isn't anonymous. He knew the system, knew the community, and was known in return. But that didn't stop the silence from reaching him. Joseph had wrapped up work that day like normal. No major stress, no red flags. He left the office, walked into town, and was never seen again. No camera footage, no confirmed sightings. No communication afterward. His phone didn't ping. His cards were unused. His family immediately reported him missing. Search efforts in Nome followed the usual script ground searches, coastlines, interviews. Nome's not that big. You can walk from one side to the other in under an hour. But somehow, Joseph vanished in a space that should have been too small to disappear in. There was talk, quiet, uneasy, talk about his work. Had he upset someone? Could his job have put him at risk? But those conversations never produced answers. No threats, no confrontations. Just vague discomfort. Even if someone knew something, they didn't say. And years later, no one has. His face still shows up on missing persons lists. His family still wants answers. Still wonders how a man could step out for a walk in the early summer light and never return. But in Nome, that's not unusual. And unfortunately, neither is what happened 2 years earlier when another man from a nearby island arrived in Nome just to cash his permanent fund dividend check. He vanished too. His name was Eric M. Apatiki. Eric M. Apatiki. Nome, Alaska. The 5th of October, 2004. For most people, the permanent fund dividend check, the PFD, is a quiet, uneventful part of Alaskan life. Once a year, the state hands out a small slice of its oil money to every eligible resident. Some people save it, some splurge, others just try to stretch it out through the long winter. But for Eric M. Apatiki, it was supposed to be the reason for a brief trip. A round-trip plan with nothing mysterious attached. Visit Nome from his home on St. Lawrence Island, cash the check, see his girlfriend, and head home. He made it as far as Nome, and then he was never seen again. Eric was 21 years old, young, quiet, known to friends and family as gentle and easygoing. He had no history of legal trouble, no enemies, no reason to be afraid of the city. He arrived in Nome in early October, 2004. He told his family he was planning to pick up his PFD, maybe buy a few supplies, and spend some time with his girlfriend before heading back to Gamble, a remote village on the northwest tip of St. Lawrence Island. That was the plan. But the plan never finished. He didn't make it to the bank, or if he did, nothing from that visit has ever been confirmed. He wasn't seen on camera. He didn't contact his girlfriend. His family never heard from him again. When he didn't return home within the expected time, worry crept in. Days passed. The ferry left without him. Then another. Still no sign. His disappearance was officially reported, and police began their search in the small, insular world of Nome, a city that knows how to keep its secrets quiet, especially when they involve native residents. There was no evidence of travel beyond Nome, no signs that he tried to leave town. His belongings were left untouched, no movement on his bank accounts, no use of his ID. And while it's common in Alaska for people to drop out of contact for a few days, Eric's family insisted this wasn't like him. Searches were conducted, but there was very little to go on. Nome isn't a sprawling metropolis. If something happened to Eric there, it happened fast, and in a place that didn't want to be found. Flyers went up, questions were asked. Some locals claimed to have seen him walking near Front Street. Others said they saw him talking to someone in a bar. But none of those accounts were ever verified. And over time, as always, the noise around the case quieted. Not because people stopped caring, but because the silence had outlasted the urgency. His family, especially his relatives on St. Lawrence Island, have never stopped searching. Every year that passes, They still speak his name, still circulate his photo, still ask what happened in Nome during those few days in early October. The Nome police kept the case open, but offered few updates. There's no official theory, no declared foul play, no resolution, just a young man who arrived in town to pick up a check and disappeared without a trace. And if that sounds too quiet to be true, then consider what happened 2 decades earlier in the same town, in the same kind of silence. A young man named Ward Kakona Olana also disappeared in Nome, and nothing was ever found. Ward Kakona Olana, Nome, Alaska, the 18th of August, 1984. In August 1984, Nome was already seasoned in mystery, a town with more unanswered questions than traffic lights. And on a mid-August day, Ward Kakona Olana, 27 years old, native, local, vanished into the kind of silence that Alaska never seems to explain. There are no dramatic details to set the stage here, no media build-up, no final phone call, just a disappearance. Ward had grown up in and around Nome. He was familiar with the land, the city, and the people who lived there. He wasn't reckless, wasn't known for erratic behavior. On the 18th of August, he was last seen somewhere in Nome. The records don't say where. They just stop. There was no note, no travel booked, no reason to believe he intended to leave. And yet, he left everything behind. He was reported missing shortly after, and a formal case was opened, but it was 1984. There were no surveillance cameras on every corner, no cell phones to trace, no digital trails to follow. Just names and memories and word-of-mouth reports. Police searched, family searched harder, nothing surfaced. Some believe he might have gone into the water. Others say he left town with someone he trusted. But the truth is, none of the theories ever gained traction. His name faded into the background hum of local lore, another name on a growing list of native men who seemed to vanish into thin air in a town that prides itself on being small enough to see everything. But it didn't see Ward go, and it didn't bring him back. For his family, the wound is still open. For the town, it's another memory turned ghost story. And if that sounds like the kind of thing that can't happen twice, think again. Because just 6 years later, almost to the day, another native woman disappeared on the same street, right in front of the Nome Nugget Inn. Her name was Justina Beatrice Kunayak. Justina Beatrice Kunayak. Nome, Alaska, the 18th of November, 1990. The last confirmed sighting of Justina Kunayak was on Front Street, Nome's central artery, a strip of bars, small shops, and the occasional person trying to outwalk the cold. She was seen walking alone near the Nome Nugget Inn, sometime in the early hours of the 18th of November. That was the last moment anyone could pin her down in time. She was 29 years old, Inupiaq, originally from Little Diomede Island, a place so remote it shares a border with Russia across frozen sea ice. But she had been living in Nome, a bigger village, with more opportunity and more danger packed into fewer square miles. She wasn't doing anything unusual, just walking. No one reported a disturbance. No one reported her getting into a vehicle or having an argument. She simply disappeared. The next morning, she wasn't where she was supposed to be. Her family called around. Friends hadn't seen her. No sign at the hospital, none at the jail. Eventually, they filed a report. The police noted the last known location, and then they waited for leads that never came. Despite the central location right there, in front of a major hotel, in the middle of town, no one stepped forward with a meaningful tip. Not in the days, not in the weeks, not in the years. Her family pushed. They demanded action. But the case went cold almost immediately. Over time, Justina's name became another on the long, invisible list of indigenous women missing from rural Alaskan towns. The ones whose photos don't get printed, whose cases aren't featured, whose disappearances are treated as more expected than tragic. To this day, there's no known suspect. No trace of her has ever been recovered. Just that final walk on a quiet street in a cold town, and then nothing. Nothing but the lingering knowledge that Nome's silence keeps repeating itself. And nowhere was that silence louder than in the skies above Alaska on the 16th of October, 1972. That's when a plane carrying 2 U.S. congressmen disappeared into the fog. And the search never found it. The Boggs-Begich congressional plane disappearance. Between Anchorage and Juneau, Alaska, the 16th of October, 1972. There are plane crashes, and then there's the one that took 2 U.S. congressmen, a pilot and a staffer, into the void and left nothing behind. No fuselage, no bodies. No radio beacon, no distress call. Just a flight path over Alaska's vast wilderness and a question that still echoes louder than the engine ever did. The morning of the 16th of October, 1972, began like 100 others. Overcast skies, chilled air, and the kind of uncertainty Alaska wears like a second skin. A twin-engine Cessna 310, small, reliable, and nothing fancy, took off from Anchorage en route to Juneau, a trip that should have lasted about 4 hours. On board were 4 men. The pilot, Don Johns, sometimes spelled Jones, known for his experience navigating Alaska's notorious terrain. Aide Russell Brown, low profile, capable, the quiet operator in the background. Congressman Nick Begich, U.S. Representative for Alaska's at-large district, a Democrat, running for re-election. And House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, one of the most powerful Democrats in Washington, a man involved in everything from civil rights to the Warren Commission and no stranger to controversy. They departed Merrill Field at around 9 a.m. They never arrived. What followed was the largest search operation in U.S. history at the time. Over 90 aircraft were involved. The Coast Guard, Civil Air Patrol, U.S. Navy, and hundreds of volunteers scoured the suspected flight path from Anchorage to Juneau. They covered 325,000 square miles of Alaskan wilderness, a scale so vast it's hard to comprehend. Planes crisscrossed forests, fjords, glaciers, mountain ranges. Boats combed coastal waters. Satellites, for the first time in a search and rescue capacity, were even brought into the effort. But despite 39 days of searching, they found nothing. Not one piece of wreckage. Not a scrap of metal. Not a torn page from a notebook or a seat cushion floating in the inlet. Nothing. And that, more than the loss of life, more than the institutional fallout, is what kept the story alive. People don't just vanish in groups of 4, not from the sky, not in the presence of high-ranking U.S. officials, but in Alaska, the rules are different. Its terrain is the size of Texas and California combined, but barely connected by roads. The land itself can bury a plane under snow, ice, or tree cover for decades, and it has. Some experts believe the Cessna likely went down somewhere in the Chugach Mountains or the Prince William Sound region, a no-man's-class land of cliffs and crevasses and weather systems that rewrite the map every hour. The weather that day wasn't terrible, but it wasn't ideal. Low visibility, occasional storms rolling through. A small aircraft could have clipped a ridge and gone down hard. It wouldn't take much. But without debris, without any sign of impact, the usual answers seemed inadequate. And that's where the theories started. Some claimed the plane had been sabotaged. Boggs had made powerful enemies. He was openly critical of the FBI, had called for reopening the investigation into the JFK assassination, and reportedly distrusted the intelligence community. He also, according to unconfirmed reports, voiced concerns about government surveillance years before Watergate exploded into headlines. Nick Begich, while not a controversial figure himself, was gaining political traction in Alaska, with a growing base and ties to the emerging native land claims movement. Was it possible, people asked, that this flight was taken down not by weather, but by design? There was also the mystery of the Emergency Locator Transmitter, or ELT. In 1972, ELTs were installed in aircraft as part of a new federal requirement designed to send a signal after impact. The plane's ELT was never activated. Some blamed faulty equipment, others suggested it had been disabled. But, like everything else in the case, the explanations only added more ambiguity. A federal investigation followed. Officially, the cause was listed as undetermined. Speculative reports suggested mechanical failure, navigational error, disorientation, nothing definitive. The wreckage has never been found, not even decades later, despite occasional efforts by private searchers and aviation enthusiasts who believe the truth is still out there somewhere beneath the canopy, somewhere under the glacier, somewhere waiting. In the absence of answers, the families were left with grief. Boggs's widow, Lindy Boggs, went on to serve in his congressional seat. Nick Begich's children, including his son Mark Begich, who would later become a U.S. Senator from Alaska, carried the political legacy forward, shadowed always by the mystery of what happened that day. And while the political system tried to move on, Alaska never really did. Because the story of the missing plane became part of its folklore, another notch in its legend of unsolved vanishing acts. A high-profile one, yes, but not the only one. Not even close. What makes it unsettling isn't just the power of those on board, it's that if they could vanish without a trace, what hope does anyone else have? And that brings us full circle. From hikers to clerks, from teenagers to congressmen, from rivers to the sky, Alaska has made an art form out of the unresolved. Its land doesn't just take people, it erases them, quietly, efficiently, without warning. Which raises the question, the only one that really matters in the end. Are these disappearances a reflection of nature's brutality? Or is there something else here? Something systemic, something human, something darker? The state doesn't say. It just keeps snowing.